Welcome back to Count Me In, where we explore the world of accounting and finance with industry experts. Today, we're thrilled to have Megan Weiss join us. With a rich background in accounting and consulting, Megan currently leads the finance and accounting division at Personiv. She's here to share her insights into the talent shortage in the accounting industry, the pros and cons of outsourcing, and how recent events like the Great Resignation and quiet quitting have shaped the profession. Let's dive in and learn from Megan's wealth of expertise and knowledge. So Megan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Count Me In podcast today. And I wanted to start off a little bit by if you could just give us an overview of your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me. So I graduated with an undergraduate degree in accounting from Kent State University. I managed to pass the CPA in my final semester of school there. So right after school, I went to work for Deloitte and Touche, one of the big four accounting firms. And I was with their audit practice. I stayed and served my time for about 3.5 years. When I left there, I went to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers in their transaction advisory services group, where we were looking at helping organizations who were getting ready to purchase a business or sell a business, just determine if it was a good fit, if they were paying a good price for the business. From there, I went to work for British Petroleum as a financial analyst. I left there after a couple of years to work for Accenture, and that was back in 2003. And that was when I was introduced to the idea of outsourcing. It was pretty new back then. Not a lot of companies were doing it, and the ones that did do it were very large enterprises. So I stayed there for 13 years, and while I was with them, I went back to school. I got my MBA from Duke University. I left Accenture to then work at a small boutique consulting firm here in Dallas, Texas. It's called Everest Group, and it is a consulting group that focuses on outsourcing service providers and companies with shared service providers. So we were really looking at, my role there was to focus on finance and accounting, and I was really looking at the service providers and their visions for the future and where the finance and accounting outsourcing industry was headed. And then while I was there, I did a project for the company I'm at now. It's called Personiv. And the project I did for them was to take a look at lines of service that they should consider getting into. So although they'd been around since the mid-'80s, finance and accounting was never really on their radar as something that they should maybe venture into. So during the course of that project, finance and accounting was one of the things that we suggested that they branch into. And so when they decided to go down that road, they reached out to me, brought me on to start it up. So I've been here now for 5 years. It's been a really exciting journey. It's kind of like being in a startup organization, but with the backing of a company that's been around for 35 years. So that's how I got to where I am today. I feel like it's a good culmination of everything I've done to date.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. You've had quite the story going to a bunch of different places, but it kind of shapes of who you are and how you see everything in the accounting world. And one thing that you and I had talked about is that there is a talent shortage in the accounting and finance world. And when it comes to having to outsource, it's because you have a talent shortage, and it's been around for over 15 years. You're reading articles of people saying, "Oh, it just showed up during the pandemic," but as we talked about your experience previously, you're saying, well, no, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's been around for at least the last 2 decades. When you've read top challenges for CFOs over the last 2 decades, talent has always been 1 or 2 on that list. And I think it really started like way back in the early 2000s when they decided that they would make accounting a 5-year program. In order to sit for the CPA, you needed a master's degree. And I think that's kind of maybe when people stopped going into the study of accounting. And really, it's been around and becoming more and more of a problem every year since. And back in 2015, the AICPA, which stands for American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, they were predicting that by 2020, 75% of their members would be retired. And I know not every accountant is a CPA, but that's a good indicator of like where the profession's headed. So, and then you add on top of that millennials and Gen Zs who are looking for more meaningful work.
Mm-hmm.
And accounting historically has not necessarily been seen as an area that is, conducive to meaningful work. So, yeah, I think it's definitely been exacerbated in the last 3 years since COVID hit, but it's been a problem for a long time coming.
So, if you're in an organization and you recognize that, hey, I need more talent in my accounting team, what are some benefits that they can see when they think about outsourcing their accounting and finance team?
Yeah, well, I think in years past, outsourcing was really about just cutting cost, and it was all about the cost savings. But today it's really about opening up a new pool of talent, a pool of talent that's equally qualified as, the talent you would find if you could here in the United States. So, it really is just a wonderful way to find very talented accountants. And on top of that, if a client chooses, you can have 24-hour coverage. You can have people that work here in the United States. You can have a team that works over, their days, which is on the other side of the world. So you're basically getting 24-hour coverage. But a lot of times consultants or outsourcing providers have people that are willing to work nights because that's, not uncommon in India or the Philippines, where a lot of this outsourcing is done, for people to work overnight in support of US companies. So and as I mentioned, it opens up an entirely new pool that maybe you can't access here in the US, but also I think a lot of organizations think that unless they have like team of 10 to 20 or even more resources to outsource, that it's not an option for them. And I know we personally at Personiv will take on as little as one resource. So if there's a role that you've been trying to fill, or maybe you're just tired of the turnover in that role, there are outsourcing service providers out there that will take on small teams of one or two and just kind of free that up from your plate and let CFOs, controllers, accounting managers focus on things other than turnover and training up new people.
Well, that makes sense. But I can imagine that not everything's all sunny side and roses when you're trying to outsource. I'm sure there are some downsides that you have to be aware of as you're getting into this.
Yes, that is definitely true. And like I mentioned, I think a lot of times in the past, and maybe it's changing a little bit today, but a lot of times in the past, people were looking at outsourcing as a way to cut cost. And I think no matter who your service provider is, you're going to have cost savings. But I think, if you're just looking for the cheapest service provider, you're probably going to end up not loving outsourcing, just because you'll end up with a team of people who are very good at following a set of instructions, but you're going to do more hand-holding than actually being able to get your work off your own plate. So I think one of the downsides to outsourcing is just looking at cost, if that's the only thing that you're concerned about. And also there's a lot of outsourcing service providers out there that will try to force you into a box, I'll say, where you're required to be on their platform, you're required to follow their process. And at the end of the day, you get the numbers, but then you're spending a lot of time incorporating those numbers back into your results for month end, which ends up adding a lot of work on the back end when you're really under a lot of pressure to get stuff done and numbers out. So I think those are really two of the biggest downsides to outsourcing, is just ending up with a very cheap team who provides very cheap service, and then just being forced into a box and having to do things a certain way that might not fit the way you do things today.
That makes sense. So in essence, you need to make sure you're doing your homework if you're going to be looking into this, to make sure you find the right organizations that will fit your needs.
Yeah, that's very true. You should be looking at a partner. It should be an organization or a service provider that's willing to partner with you, customize the solution to fit your needs. And then our clients have very good experiences with outsourcing. And so we're, very careful to provide them with a service that is very customized to what it is that they need.
So, you've made it very clear through your experience that, the talent shortage has been around for 20 years, but the last 3 years have definitely not helped. We got the Great Resignation, we got quiet quitting going on.
Yeah.
How do you think the last 3 years have really affected that talent shortage? And also, when we think about accounting education and people going into accounting, they're not going to the traditional roles.
Yeah, that's very true. So just looking at the Great Resignation as an example, you have a group of people who are known to be very conservative with their money, and they've probably maxed out their 401ks. They're in a position where if retiring early is an option, they're going to take it. So a lot of people that were expected to be around for maybe another 5 to 10 years have decided, COVID hit and they reprioritized and they decided to leave the workforce earlier than expected. And baby boomers leaving has been kind of a big issue on the horizon for like a decade or more now. So that's how the Great Resignation has affected the talent pool. And then you have quiet quitting. You have people who, they're coming to work, but they're putting in the bare minimum effort. And the rest of the team is having to pick up slack, and the rest of the team is probably already burnt out. Accounting is known for, grueling hours at times throughout the year, particularly month end and year end. And if you have someone who's kind of slacking, your team, the rest of your team is forced to pick up that slack. And then when you look at people that are just, they're just entering college and they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. Like I said, a lot of younger people are looking for more meaningful work, maybe sexier work. There's a lot of technology companies out there these days that are luring, really great talent away. And they have more options when they get out of school, even if they did study accounting. There's consulting and there's just a lot of other avenues that they can take. And I also feel like the skill sets that accountants need have changed dramatically over the last 20 years as well. Whereas, people who were just good with numbers could study accounting and be successful. Now it's really the soft skills that stand out and make a candidate great. So yeah, you have all of those things working together to really put a noose around hiring accountants. And it's been a painful few years for sure.
It definitely has, and I know everybody's feeling it. And, I think the other thing that we have to remember too is that, the accounting role is changing. Like you mentioned, that you have to have different sets of skills. You can't just be the number cruncher. You have to be the business partner. You have to be the data analyst. You have to do a number of different roles that people weren't expecting to. And the older generation has to adapt, and the newer generation has to jump on this new wheel.
Yeah.
And so everybody has to change. And so, how have you seen organizations doing that?
Yeah, well, I think in general, accounting hasn't done a very good job of marketing itself, which is why I think a lot of younger people steer away from it, because it's still kind of viewed as like the nerd that sits in their office crunching numbers. And really, accounting can take you a lot of different places. And I think my career is a good example. I've done so many different things and I've really enjoyed most of what I've done. And I just don't think that accounting has done a really good job of marketing that to younger generations. But yeah, these days accountants are more storytellers than anything else. They have to know the business. They have to be able to understand data and create insights out of data. And it's challenging, it's rewarding, and organizations could not function without an accounting department, which is, again, part of the talent problem. But I actually read an article in the Washington Post earlier this week that said, and this might be a bit extreme, but that capitalism is, it might fall because of this accounting talent shortage. And if you think about it, the only reason why capitalistic markets survive is because people trust the financial statements that are behind the investments they're making.
Mm-hmm.
And, without accountants making sure that those numbers are accurate and fairly depicted, that, you have chaos. And we've seen it as recently as the collapse of Enron a few years ago, and then Arthur Andersen right behind it. So yeah, talent is a big deal. And filling accounting roles is very important for companies and countries. So
yeah, it is. Now, I know Personiv did a survey, and talking about the war for talent after COVID-19, the results of the CFO talent survey. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what your organization saw in surveying CFOs.
Yeah, so we just did a survey in 2022 this year, and the last time we had done the survey was in 2020. And in 2020, we saw that it was a problem, but in 2022, everything seemed to be magnified. And just here's like 5 of the takeaways from the report, but 34% of CFOs say that their most pressing challenge is finding and hiring qualified accounting talent. So that's more than a third who would put that at the very top of their list, is just finding good talent. 81% of finance leaders say that they have felt the accounting talent shortage in 2022. And of those, more than 10% think it's just going to get worse in 2023. We saw that 85% of finance leaders say that COVID-19 has affected their hiring process and talent sourcing abilities, and 72% said that it had an impact on retention. And I think companies that are right now struggling between, do we bring people back into the office? Do we let them stay remote? I feel like the retention problem for them is even more magnified. And then we saw that 47% of CFOs said that they need to hire at least one qualified accountant within the year. And I think that number for us was up by 20% from when we looked at it just 2 years ago.
Wow.
And then 88% of finance leaders say they wish that they had more time to spend on strategic initiatives, meaning because they have a shortage of talent, they're mired down in the details rather than, leading their organizations into the future.
I mean, that's very telling, is that they can't even look strategically and help be that business partner because they don't even have the time to do that.
Yeah.
That says a lot about what's happening.
Yeah. They're busy spending their days putting out fires and just trying to get numbers out the door in a timely fashion, let alone, looking strategically into the future. It's just not possible for a lot of organizations right now.
Yeah. So we'll make sure to put a link to the report in our show notes today. But as you think about this report and what you've seen, the 2022 report, and let's say you guys do, and I'm assuming you do every 2 years, 2024, do you think that it's going to be any better, or where do you think that things are going to go as we look forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is going to continue to be a problem. I think we're going to continue to see demand go up for accountants. It's something that's gone up every year, even as we automate processes. There's more of a need for people who can analyze data, and supply is dwindling. So the demand is growing, supply is dwindling, and I think this problem is only going to exacerbate in the coming years. So I'm interested to see where we are in 2 to 5 years.
I am as well, and maybe we'll have you back on in 2 years and we can have that discussion. Megan, how does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. That would I'd look forward to that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. It was great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's been fun.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.